not only can we have perfect competitors in both the product and the factor markets, we can also have imperfect competitors in the product and the factor markets. And let's take a look at those. So if we have an imperfect competitor or an imperfect producer in the product market, remember we're talking about sellers of goods in the product market. We're manufacturing goods and services that will be purchased by households. Our imperfect producers are all facing downward sloping demand, and that means that in order to sell more, they must decrease the price that they're asking. All are price makers to some degree. It varies depending on the uniqueness of the product. The more unique the product is, the fewer substitutes the product has, the more price-making ability the producer has. Monopolistic competitors will break even or earn normal profit in the long run. All others, oligopolies, monopolies, might earn an economic profit in the long run. They could also break even in the long run. Could be either one. And the amount of barriers to entry will vary significantly depending on the type of producer we're talking about. A monopolistic competitor will have very few barriers to entry. On the other hand, a monopoly has many significant barriers to entry, and that is what creates the monopoly power, the fact that there's only one seller, the fact that it's impossible for somebody else to break into this market. So let's take a look at what imperfect competition looks like. Downward sloping demand. That's the hallmark of imperfect competition. You know, the moment that you see downward sloping demand, that you must have an imperfect competitor. Because demand is downward sloping, and because this is going to be a single price seller, assuming that we cannot successfully price discriminate, what's going to have to happen here is that we're going to have a marginal revenue curve that is inside the demand curve. So marginal revenue, the amount that we collect from selling one more of an item, remember it's change in total revenue divided by change in output. In order to sell that additional item, we had to drop the price. So the difference is magnified in marginal revenue, and it's going to be even steeper than the demand curve. So our marginal revenue curve will be inside the demand curve and steeper. Now, in order to determine quantity, we're going to have to add in marginal cost. Remember, marginal cost is shaped like a check mark or a Nike swoosh. The intersection of marginal revenue and marginal cost is going to determine our output. So that's this point right here will determine the amount that we'll be willing to produce. But it won't determine the amount that we're going to charge. Remember, we are most definitely capitalists, and we want to earn the most money possible. So we're going to charge as much as we can get away with. And if you remember the definition of a demand curve is made up of the highest values that each and every consumer has for this product. The demand curve represents the most that a consumer would pay. So we're going to charge that consumer the most that he or she will be willing to pay. So our output will be determined by where marginal revenue and marginal cost cross. But our price will be determined by the intersection of quantity and the demand curve. We're an imperfect competitor for a number of reasons. One of them is that we're not producing at the socially optimal amount. Just for reference, the socially optimal amount is located right here, where our marginal cost and our demand curve cross. So that's socially optimal. This is also allocatively efficient. Allocative efficiency deals with the amount of stuff that we're producing. If we're allocatively efficient, we produce exactly as much as the market wants to have, no more, no less. We get the largest amount of stuff to the largest amount of people without wasting any resources, giving them to people who over or undervalue them. So we're also allocatively efficient and productively efficient. We will never be productively efficient as an imperfect producer because even at long run break even, which remember would mean our price is equal to our ATC. Oh. There we go. Got to go through the lowest point. Even if we are at long run break even, because the lowest point of ATC has to go through the marginal cost curve, we will never be at lowest ATC. And so we can never, ever be productively efficient. Not in the long run. Now we're going to take a look at the imperfect competitor in the factor market. We call this imperfect competitor a monopsony. A monopsony is a single purchaser of a resource. Monopsonies are very rare. And monopsonies have the luxury of being wage makers. They're the only buyer. They get to decide what they're willing to pay. If we graph a monopsony, we're going to have a downward sloping demand curve. The monopsony faces a downward sloping demand curve. And because we're in the factor market, that demand curve is also our marginal revenue product. Our marginal revenue product. Unlike the perfect competitor, however, this time we don't face a perfectly flat supply curve. Now our marginal resource cost is going to be upward sloping. So there will be a supply of labor that is our marginal resource cost. As we purchase additional units of labor, we are going to be paying higher rates. We don't get to pay the same wage if we want to hire more people. We have to raise the rate. And because we're going to pay all of our workers or pay the same amount for each unit of resource, we're not going to be able to price discriminate here. What we're going to be doing is raising our wages at a much faster rate than supply rises. So I take that back. Should not have put this in. So our marginal resource cost, sorry about that, is going to be inside and steeper than the supply curve. So once again, remember, the marginal things determine quantity. So the quantity of labor that we'll hire, the quantity of this unique resource that we're going to purchase, is going to be determined where the marginal resource cost crosses the marginal revenue product. And that's this point right here. So this will be the amount that we purchase. But we're good capitalists. We're going to make sure we don't pay a dime more than we have to. This isn't a charity. We're in business to make a profit. We're going to pay as little as we can get away with, and that's represented by the supply curve. So the wage or the price or the cost that we pay is going to be determined by the supply curve. So you should look for this kind of T shape on your factor market graph. Now, if we look at our product market and our factor market graphs side by side, you'll notice some similarities. The similarities occur in the fact that both of them have something that has to have another curve inside, because what's happening is that as we either produce more in the product market or buy more in the factor market, we end up paying at an increasing rate or selling at an increasing rate. And what ends up happening is we end up with these curves inside. Our revenue or our marginal stuff is inside some other curve. In the case of the factor market, it's the marginal resource cost is inside supply. Remember, supply is related to costs. And our marginal revenue is inside demand in our product market. In both cases, we're imperfect because we're not allocatively efficient. We're not productively efficient, but most importantly, we are looking at a situation in which one curve determines the quantity and another curve determines the price. So in the product market, quantity is determined by marginal revenue and marginal cost, and price is determined by quantity and the demand curve. In the factor market, where we're being purchasers, our quantity is determined by the combination of marginal revenue or marginal resource cost and the demand curve, marginal revenue product, but our wage will be determined by supply.